Consider two tasks, neither reinforced by white socialization, which predict IQ scores with unequal accuracy. If IQ measures socialization, the race gap should be the same on both. In another context, I mentioned two such tasks, namely recalling digits in the order presented and recalling digits in reverse order, the latter being the better predictor of IQ. So basically, for example, if I say 1358 and then ask you to put it in reverse, you say 8531. Hopefully. Neither whites nor blacks are taught either skill, which differ only in that backward digit span requires some mental transformation of the input. You have to think about it backwards instead of just repeating what was just said to you. So you're not just memorizing or repeating, you're transforming, as he says. Assuming the race difference is spurious, any white advantage on backward digit span should be no greater than the white advantage in forward digit span. In fact, the race gap on backward digit span is twice as great. How do you explain that? A race difference in IQ that vanished when status was fixed would not necessarily be a status artifact, for the question would simply shift to that of why so many blacks occupy low status. In a recent study of low birth weight blacks and whites at age 5, for instance, Brooks, Gunn, Klebanoff, and Duncan, 1996, found that controlling for family poverty, maternal education, maternal verbal ability, provision of learning experiences, and maternal warmth reduced an 18-point IQ difference to insignificance. They conclude from this that, quote, ethnicity is not a predictor of IQ in this sample. Fisher et al., 1996, offer a similar reanalysis of the Herrnstein-Murray sample with a similar conclusion. The obvious question, though, hopefully obvious, is why black families are so much poorer than white and why black mothers provide their children with so many fewer learning experiences. So basically, they took the best of black families and said, look, they have high IQs. Yeah. You're cherry picking. You're not picking an average person. Basically, if you control for all these factors, then you're also controlling for IQ. If you control for family poverty, maternal education, maternal verbal ability, provision of learning experiences, maternal warmth, then you're also controlling for IQ. The reason that the black families that they found that had high levels of these variables is because they were also high IQ people. There were exceptions. Of course, exceptional families are going to have exceptional IQs. Duh. They didn't prove anything. The conventional explanation that the majority imposes low status is doubtful. Whatever may have been true a century ago, in recent decades, whites have not forced blacks to watch too much television or prevented blacks from buying books or visiting museums. Far from seeking to impede black attainment, whites have tried hard to promote it. As I argue in fuller detail in Chapter 8, no one can responsibly explain current low black status by racism. An obvious alternative hypothesis is that causality flows to status from intelligence as measured by IQ. Like I just said. An individual's IQ helps determine his attained status and correlates with his parents' status because his parents were likely to be near him in intelligence and to have created an environment commensurate with their common intelligence level. Which is also basically what I just said. Excuse me for being redundant, but it's worth repeating. In other words, high IQ parents have high IQ children, for whom they create rich environments. Blacks, being less intelligent, create poorer environments, on average. Empirically, almost 25% of children will spend their adulthoods in a social class other than their parents, and a child's IQ in the elementary grades is a better predictor of his social class as an adult than the class of his parents. So a rich, low IQ kid is more likely to end up poor than a high IQ poor kid. This suggests that status is an effect of individual traits like intelligence rather than their cause. Even Brooks, Gunn, Klebanoff, and Duncan, who seem unfriendly toward a genetic approach, admit that, quote, maternal verbal ability test scores probably reflect genetics. This interpretation becomes most natural when we refrain from reifying status as a cause of life outcomes. Status is merely a collective label for income, occupation, number of books in the home, museum going, and scholastic attainment, not a power producing those factors. So it is vacuous to attribute these factors to status. They must have some other explanation, an obvious one being individual traits like intelligence and personality. You're more likely to go to a museum if you have a high IQ than if you have rich parents. There's plenty of stupid kids with rich parents who have no desire to go to a museum. Your IQ is going to make you curious, and your curiosity is going to make you go to a museum. Temperament and motivation. Many observers, including a number ready to attribute all black difficulties to racism, agree that there is a distinctive black behavioral style. Kochman, 1983, describes the white approach to argument as low-keyed, dispassionate, impersonal, and non-challenging, cool, quiet, and without affect, while the black approach is high-keyed, animated, interpersonal, and confrontational, heated and loud. Blacks do not simply debate an idea, the white mode, they debate the person debating the idea. Wow, that sounds like people in my comments. You're a shitty person. Okay, it's fine, whatever, but what about the thing I'm reading? Is it wrong? You're stupid. Okay, maybe I'm stupid, but like, what about, can you present an argument? You're ugly. That's called an ad hominem fallacy. You might want to look that up. Hacker, citing several black psychologists, remarks that, quote, black children are more attuned to their body and physical needs, end quote, and so, quote, need more leeway for moving around the classroom, end quote. Well, that's a nice way to put it. Kochman likewise mentions black animation, vitality, and intense and spontaneous emotional behavior. I would call that emotional incontinence, but okay. And comments that the black rhythmic style of walking is a response to impulses coming from within. I agree with that. Caucasoid classical music, emphasizing harmony and irregularity, is patently unlike Negroid jazz, rhythm and blues, and rap, which I enjoy, by the way, which features improvisation and syncopation. To judge by films made by anthropologists, these are traits common to African music and the musical games of black children in the United States. Negroid dancing involves pelvic thrusting and other mimicry of intercourse, absent from Caucasoid dancing, at least until recently. There's been a bit of an infection there. Nelson George generalizes these differences to a distinctive black athletic aesthetic, common to activities as disparate as jazz, basketball, and sermonizing, involving improvisation, aggression, intimidation, arrogance, and the will to humiliate an opponent. George concedes that this behavior can appear untutored, undisciplined, and immature. Jones and Hochner agree that the black athletic approach involves, quote, an individualistic dimension. Black athletes place greater emphasis on the stylistic component of play and the expressive character of the performance, end quote. Majors and Bilson, in their book Cool Pose, 1992, write that the physical posturing or styling of black males is intended to deliver a single critical message: pride, strength, and control. The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or MMPI, is a widely used personality test, race differences on which are described for a number of populations in Dahlstrom, Lockar, and Dahlstrom's MMPI Patterns of American Minorities. Overall, blacks achieve higher average scores than whites on the psychopathy, schizophrenia, and hyperactivity scales. findings normally interpreted to show estrangement and impulse-ridden fantasies, unusual thought patterns, and aspiration-reality conflict, which is why there are so many wannabe rappers and athletes who are never going to be those things. Dreger and Miller also report higher black male scores on the hypomania scale, taken to indicate outgoing, sociable, and overly energetic patterns, tendencies to act impulsively, and with poor judgment. Black males tend to score higher on precisely the MMPI scales, on which the prison population deviates from the population mean. What are the odds? Elevated MMPI are equally predictive of criminal behavior for blacks and whites. It is striking and surprised the investigators that, while black males always exceed white males in psychopathic deviance and hypomania, blacks who have attended integrated schools attain more deviant scores than those who have attended segregated schools, contrary to the hypothesis that segregation distorted the black personality. Shuey and others have found that integration adversely affects the self-conception of black schoolchildren. Surprise, surprise. I wonder why that could be. If you really care about black people, according to this, you should want segregation. I know that sounds outlandish and outrageous. That's just what the data is pointing toward. You can't deny it. That black self-esteem is low is a virtual axiom of popular sociology. In Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court cited damage to self-concept caused by segregation, supposedly shown by an experiment in which black children from segregated schools preferred white dolls as proof that separate is inherently unequal. The willingness of young black males to rob and kill for fashionable sneakers is attributed to a desperate need for peer approval as a source of self-respect. Fisher et al., 1996, stated as fact that de facto segregation, quote, lowers black youths' self-esteem and ultimately lowers their test scores. But, as in the MMPI study, black self-esteem is typically found to exceed white. According to Shuey, quote, at the preschool level, there seems to be some evidence of awareness of color differences and a feeling of inferiority associated with dark skin. But at the grade school level and continuing through high school and college, there is no consistent evidence of lower self-esteem in Negroes. If there is a difference, it would appear to be more likely that Negroes have a greater sense of personal worth, rather than the reverse. A survey of adolescent girls commissioned by the American Association of University Women indicated, to its sponsors' apparent surprise, given the poor academic performance of black adolescents, that black females enjoy higher self-esteem than whites. A study of body image found that while 90% of white females think they are too fat, only 12% of black females express dissatisfaction with their weight, which is surprising because they tend to be fatter. I guess we can call this the Lizzo effect, even though this is before Lizzo. Lizzo syndrome, or you know what I'm saying. I guess it's because they managed to convince themselves, as many white women have also, that they're not fat, they're thick. Or as they might put in their online dating profile, curvy. Full-figured. You're fat. All right, anyway. The doll experiment cited in Brown was duplicated with identical results for black children in integrated schools in the North. Seligman, 1987. Meaning either that integration harms black self-esteem as much as segregation, or that the doll test is invalid. So the integration was based on a study that was completely meaningless, at best. Literature reviews by Porter and Washington, 1979, Crocker and Major, 1989, and Baumeister, Smart, and Bowden, 1996, agreed in finding the self-esteem of black students equal to or higher than that of white students. Tashikori, 1993, and Tashikori and Thompson, 1991, in other review articles, also report that blacks consistently value themselves more highly than whites do, the gap being smaller for blacks attending integrated schools. So black kids in integrated schools have higher self-esteem than the white kids do, but the gap is even bigger in non-integrated schools, which I guess would just mean like an inner city school where there's not a lot of white kids, or I'm not sure because there's no more segregated schools. Like authors Hare and Steele, Tasha Corey considers it likely that blacks do not use academic success as a standard of personal worth to the extent that whites do. At the same time, blacks in integrated schools are more aware of the shortfall in their achievements, given what is considered minimum performance in their surroundings. Many commentators explain low black self-esteem in terms of feelings of powerlessness. Tasha Corey reports that blacks do perceive themselves as more powerless than whites, but that this self-perception does not translate into lower self-esteem, apparently because blacks regard the self as less of a locus of control. Lefcourt, 1965, found that, faced with a choice between two risky situations with equal expected payoffs, one of whose outcomes depends on chance, while the outcome of the other depends on agent response, blacks are more apt than whites to choose the chance alternative. That's interesting. More likely to take a gamble on life instead of apply your will. Coleman found black high school seniors considerably more likely than white to agree that, quote, good luck is more important for success than hard work. Wow. Black students estimate their own academic competence more highly than whites despite their own objective and self-reported lower academic achievement. So basically, they're more delusional. Black high school seniors in the Coleman study were more apt than the whites to classify themselves as among the brightest, and less likely to agree that sometimes I feel I just can't learn, despite poorer academic performance. Remarkably, Southern rural blacks, whose academic performance fell below that of all other blacks as well as all whites, were more apt than other blacks to classify themselves as bright and able to learn. All told, aspiration-reality conflict is prominent in this literature. Many teachers I have spoken to comment informally on their black students' unrealistic expectations of becoming doctors or lawyers. Anderson, 1994, reports that black gang members believe they deserve to be treated as superior, which Baumeister, Smart, and Bowden, 1996, interpret as manifesting high self-esteem. That's a really rosy way to look at it. Certain MMPI items reliably distinguish the races. Blacks agree more frequently with the following statements. I am an important person. It wouldn't make me nervous if any members of my family got into trouble with the law. I am entirely self-confident. If given the chance, I could make a good leader of people. I have often had to take orders from someone who did not know as much as I did. Deficient self-esteem does not seem indicated. In addition, blacks more readily agree that most people will use somewhat unfair means to gain profit or an advantage rather than lose it. Most people make friends because friends are likely to be useful to them. Most people are honest chiefly through fear of being caught. It is not hard for me to ask help from my friends even though I cannot return the favor. I am sure I am being talked about. It would be better if almost all the laws were thrown away. A person shouldn't be punished for breaking a law that he thinks is unreasonable. These responses are interpreted to reveal greater cynicism, mistrust, conflict with authority, and, quote, externalization of blame for one's problems, end quote. Race differences in MMPI scores diminish when social status, IQ, and level of education are fixed. But once again, this does not show MMPI differences to be status artifacts. Traits that affect scores may also affect status, as for instance, friction with authority impedes advancement in hierarchies. The theme connecting anecdotal and analytic studies of the black personality is focus on the near term, not future orientation. Big difference. Blacks average 73 hours of television watching per week to whites 50. Those are both really bad numbers, but okay. And spend twice as much on movies as whites. Since black income is only 2/3 that of whites, this means that blacks spend proportionally 3 times more of their income on movies. Black expenditures for electronic games and gadgets is comparable to white, but blacks buy proportionately far fewer computers than whites or Asians. Walter Mischel found that black Trinidadian children, given a choice between getting a smaller candy bar immediately or a larger one in a week, tended, much more than matched white children, to choose the smaller immediate candy, the difference being, quote, so great as to make tests for the significance of the difference superfluous, end quote. Michel reports undertaking the study because informants had suggested that, quote, Negroes are impulsive, indulge themselves, settle for next to nothing if they can get it right away, do not work or wait for bigger things in the future, end quote. This attitude toward reward can be described in a variety of ways. More rapid decay of reinforcement, unwillingness or inability to defer gratification, and extreme present orientation. Living in the moment, the power of now. An individual's time preference is measured by the money he insists on getting tomorrow for foregoing $1 today. The larger the return he requires, the greater his preference for the present over the future. Low time preference individuals will endure deprivation today for benefits in the far future, the rate at which they discount future goods in comparison to present ones being small. Unlike intelligence, time preference does not cause behavior, it summarizes behavioral syndromes. To say that someone saves money assiduously because his time preferences are low is to fit his tendency to save into a pattern of caution and foresight he follows in other situations. This understood, the central motivational difference between blacks and whites may be said to be higher black time preferences. It is often said that blacks ignore the future because oppression makes thinking about tomorrow pointless. That explanation is consistent with, indeed suggests, the fact of higher black time preferences. Whether oppression or endogenous variables account for that fact is one of the topics of the next chapter. I have one footnote here. No, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3. Out of many. Out of like 50. Let's see. Protest marches prevented inclusion of blacks in one 11,000 subject study of crime that included biological variables. For this reason, quote, all the biological and genetic studies of crime that have been conducted to date have been done on whites. When people don't want to know the truth, it can be pretty suggestive of what the truth is. Let's see here. Because few black patrolmen were passing the test for sergeant, the New York Police Department created a new test in 1989, which black police officers and consultants approved as unbiased. The pass rate for blacks on this test proved to be 2%, and it too was labeled biased. At this writing, a similar sequence of events is unfolding in Chicago. And the last one. Kochman consistently describes whites as the beneficiaries of racial asymmetries, remarking that black women repulse the sexual advances of black men with sassy insults, and that black men perceive being ignored as a grave affront. Kochman suggests it is up to white women to meet black sexual advances with repartee, with sassy insults like black women do. The fault lying with white women if embarrassed silence provokes black men to aggression. Talk about victim blaming. Wow. That's like when you say, oh, you shouldn't have gone out dressed like that. If you don't want to get R-worded, shouldn't have gone out dressed like that. Shouldn't have rejected the black man like that. Wow. That makes me want to throw up.